after the destruction. Rabbinic Judaism evolved after the destruction of the temple. Therefore, where do you stand? Okay, so I don't know that it's 100% true that Rabbinic Judaism evolved after the destruction of the temple. What I would say is this. During the Second Temple period, there were many Jewish movements, right? We know for sure of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes, and there probably were many others, okay? At the time, as a strict technical matter, there were no Karaites and Rabbinites as we understand them today, okay? The Pharisees, in my view, right, so let me tell you what's not my view. The Pharisees, what defined them is they ate meat in a state of ritual purity. So they had to have a temple in order to be ritually pure. At the destruction of the temple, the Pharisees could no longer exist because they couldn't be ritually pure. Now, here's my view, and I think most historians would say it's substantiated. We could discuss to what degree. My view is that the rabbinic tradition, my view, evolved out of the Pharisaic tradition, but not to the exclusion of other traditions, right? I don't want to say, oh, the Rabbinites are modern day Pharisees, and I'm not saying that at all. The Rabbinites clearly have their own theology that definitely evolved. So anyway, the question is like, how do I view on sacrifices and temple rituals? We don't have a temple today. We can't sacrifice, can't do any of that stuff. And so that's simple as that. And next question came in is, how are Karaites viewed by the Orthodox establishment in Israel and other Jews? If you are a Sephardic Jew, you've like literally never had a problem with Karaites in your life. Like it's just culturally speaking was never a problem. If you're an Ashkenazi Jew, generally speaking, they have not accepted Karaites as readily. There's a lot of reasons for that historically. We can get into that another time. So, and the Orthodox Jew establishment in Israel, the Karaites actually have their own representation before the state of Israel. And so our status is actually better than, or at least historically, it's kind of changed in the last 5 or 7 years. Our status actually has been better than, let's say, Reform Jews or secular Jews who the rabbinic orthodoxy claims authority over them, whereas we Karaites were able to say, no, we don't have your rabbinic authority. We are outside of your purview. And so our status was better than we'll call it Reform Jews in Israel. And also, just so you know, the rabbinic courts don't like this, right? They literally don't like this. Why? Because we're outside of their authority. So when I say that I'm performing ritual slaughter for kashrut correctly, they're like, no, you're not doing it correctly because we, the rabbis, say you have to do it this way. And like, we, the Karaites, say you have to do it this way. And just between us, the methodology is 99.7% the same. I made that number up, but it's basically the same thing, right? And so when the Karaites call their food kosher, the rabbinic authorities gave them tickets. How could you call this butcher shop kosher? It doesn't follow the rabbinic tradition. And then the Karaites and Rabbinites have gone to court. And like about 4 years ago, there was a famous case all the way to Israeli Supreme Court about like Karaite Shechita. And there was actually one case along the way it was the Karaites on one side, the rabbinic authorities on the other side, in front of a Muslim judge, right? So in Israel, so here's somebody who understands slaughter from an Islamic tradition, or my understanding is he understood it, but understood that you could have various different ways of doing things that are all very similar, and whether or not you could call one kosher or not was the debate, right? Great. Any other questions? No. So the next question came in directly to me. Okay, so is this the same community as Qumran? The Qumran community are the Essenes, as far as we know. They're the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scroll Authority, right? We don't know much about these people other than what's been left in their literature, and we can piece it together, right? And we know considerable amounts, but we don't know enough to really complete the picture. So definitely different from the Qumran, definitely different from the Samaritans. How many Karaites are there? There's 6. I mean, realistically, there's maybe 6,000 in Israel, maybe 20,000 in Israel. I don't know, depending on who you talk to. Paternal or matrilineal descent is another question that came in. Look, I spoke with the chief Hacham of the Karaite community years ago, and he's like, they would the community itself, as far as stamping somebody as a Karaite or a Jew, said they would never accept anybody that's not patrilineal descent. Patrilineal descent, not matrilineal, patrilineal descent. Right. And so the question then is really, do you need both parents to be Jewish? And that's a bigger debate, and we could talk about it some other time. All right, let me jump into a few slides, but happy to take any questions. Just drop them into the chat, and I'm pretty good at monitoring that. Let me just present a few slides and we'll go from there. Sorry, wrong thing. I missed the button to share my screen. Okay, so what you're seeing here is something from the Karaite Declaration of Faith. Declaration of Faith, not principles of faith. So what I mean by that is principles of faith, tend to be like drawn out lists of things, right? This is a declaration of faith, and we recite this on every holiday. So all the holiday, not Purim, every Torah holiday, right? And somebody from the congregation recites it, and the community will respond at certain places. So like you see the asterisks there that say like Uv Moshe Avdo at the bottom, here and here. That's where the community responds, right? So the person reading it, I'll just read this so you can get a sense of the melody. I don't have the best voice in the community, but you'll get the point. Up here. Tuv tam vadat lamedeni ki v'mitzvotecha hemanti Haminu b'Adonai Elohechem v'te'amenu haminu binvia v'hatzlichu v'aminu b'Adonai uv Moshe Avdo. Right, so that the uv Moshe Avdo is said by the community. Okay, so what's interesting here is, again, what starts off this, like for a Karaite declaration of faith, it starts off pretty well. The first two lines, you could see the Tamei Mikra, the little dots and lines under here, right here, like this is from the Torah or from the Tanakh, right? So teach me good judgments and knowledge, for I believe in your commandments. Okay, that's a great thing to start off for declaration of faith. Then it says this line: believe in the Lord your God, and you will be established. Believe in his prophets, and you will prosper. And again, there's the verse from the Bible. The next one, not a direct quote, but it says, and they believed in the Lord. Oh, no, it is a direct quote. Sorry. They believed in the Lord Moses, his servant. So again, belief in Moses is one of the principles of faith. Here, the God is one, and he's your redeemer. Moses' servant, again, is God's chosen one and his faithful emissary with signs and wonders. And the community declares truth, emet, at the end of all this. So nothing I've shown you so far implicates Karaite theology at all. Like everybody here believes, every Jewish movement historically believed that there's a God, and that God gave us Moses, his servant, his prophet. Okay, and his Torah is perfect and pure and right, enlightening to the heart, soothing to the soul. These are all references, biblical references. Again, nothing here implicates Karaite theology. This is any rabbinic Jew could say this as well. And his prayer is the temple, and his temple is the house of prayer, the house of worship, the house of sacrifice. Again, nothing here implicates Karaite theology. Any rabbinic Jew can say this as well. And at the end, emet. All right, now here we go. And this is where, although anybody can say this, what you have to understand is that this is really I would say a polemic. It's an affirmation against the Rabbinites, okay? Because by this time, the rabbinic Jews were using a fixed calendar, right? And so in most rabbinic communities, and even to this day, right? So when we Karaites are saying, and the new moon, and the new moon in its renewal, and in its visibility and its appearance to the eye in the evening at the time, his testimony is a reliable witness in heaven, Selah, a valid sign, an indication for the beginning of the months according to the word of God. What we were really saying is we Karaites know that the new moon is the moon for the months, and you should not rely on a calendar. That's what it's saying. I mean, it doesn't say don't rely on a calendar, but it's saying the moon is the testimony. The moon is the sign that tells you this, not some piece of paper that tells you when to do things, right? And so, yes, anyone can say this, but the new moon is what this is really saying is that we Karaites keep this tradition and you Rabbinites don't. That's basically what it's saying. I mean, it doesn't say that you Rabbinites don't, but that's the implication. And the Aviv, so Aviv is ripened barley, that is found in the land of Israel, in its manner, in its time, is a sign for the beginning of the years. Now, what I want to explain to you is that for most Jewish communities, even most Karaites today who've adopted this rabbinic custom, rabbinic calendar, is that you don't, so in biblical times, the Torah doesn't tell us when the new moon starts, when the new year starts. It just says that the first month is Rosh Chodesh Aviv, the month in which Aviv is present, and Aviv is ripened barley. So that's when the month starts. Well, when Jews lost access to the land of Israel, it became hard to figure out when the barley was ripe in Israel to start the calendar again, start the new year. So in the rabbinic tradition, there's a 19-year calendar, right, 19-year cycle, and there are 7 leap months or leap years throughout the 19-year cycle, and those leap months happen every 2 or every 3 years, depending on the calendar. Okay, what the Karaites are saying is we don't need this. You can go and look in the land of Israel and find the Aviv and set the months according to that. So that's the background here. Although it says exactly what the rabbinic Jews would believe as well, what they're really saying is, look, the moon is a valid sign and we keep it, and the Aviv is a valid sign and we keep it, and you don't. And his prophets and his angels and emissaries, this is all, relatively, non-controversial stuff. Okay, so I've already explained to you kind of there's 3 biblical verses to open this. Okay. The first line through, it says, Adonai Eloheinu Boreinu Go'aleinu Yotzerenu Kedoshenu Yahid Be'olamo Emet, right? That's something that you see in rabbinic and Karaite theology, right? Again, that line can be said by anybody. That's kind of fine. You could see here that it looks like the start of an acrostic, like Aleph, Bet, Gimel, right? Kind of looks like it's in alphabetical order a little bit. It's possible that there are that this list came from a longer list of things, but not necessary. Let's keep this. Let's skip this. Skip this. Skip this. Not really important. Torah is perfect. Let's skip this. All this stuff is important, right? But like realistically, it doesn't really. This doesn't get into like the differences of Karaites and Rabbinites. Okay, and the new moon. So I told you this new moon, right? Well, there was a Karaite named Daniel al-Kumisi who lived in the 9th century, and he wrote a letter to Karaites who lived in the diaspora. He moved to the land of Israel. He moved to Jerusalem, and he's writing a letter to the Karaites who are living in the diaspora, and he says to them, "Now you are living in the midst of the kingdom of Ishmael. Ishmael meaning Islamic kingdoms, right? Who are favorable to those who fix the new moon by lunar observation. Why then are you afraid of the Rabbinites?" Right. So what he's saying is, hey, you, Karaites, you shouldn't be afraid of the Rabbinites, because the implication here, okay, it doesn't say it directly, but the implication here is that you Karaites are observing the new moon, and you should continue to do, because you'll curry favor with your rulers. Don't be afraid of the Rabbinites, right? God will help you, right? So he's trying to encourage them to continue this, what he understands precept of searching and fixing by the new moon and not by some calendar. This is this book called Royal Attire. If you are interested in any one book, you can go to thekaraitepress.com and buy this book. In fact, you can buy all paperbacks right now for $27. This book here goes through all the major differences between Karaites and Rabbinites. The middle third of the book. You can ignore the first stuff. It's all polemical nonsense. But this part that says laws from the book of Deuteronomy through laws from the book of Devarim, Bereshit, so the book of Devarim, it goes through all the cool things about the differences in Karaites and Rabbinites. Okay. This guy here, does anyone know who Rabbi Ovadia Bartiromo was? He wrote a commentary on the Mishnah. So he's not a Karaite, right? He's a Rabbinite. And he says he's traveling to the land of Israel, and he says all this stuff. He says all this stuff about what he observed. He says about the Karaites, they sanctify the new moon with witnesses, right? So he wrote in, I don't remember and I can't see. He wrote in the 11th century, 10th, 14th century, I don't know. Is it Rabbi or somebody? If you just look it up and drop it in the comments, and I'll remember for the future. Anyway, he wrote this commentary, but in his book, it's Pathway to Jerusalem, he's telling you that the Karaites, this is the best here, right? So the Karaites in Cairo make Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur on a different day than the Karaites in Jerusalem. There are 2 Karaite households who live in Jerusalem today, and they see nothing wrong with this, meaning they were totally fine with people doing something different. Ve'aviv nimsa, this is the land of barley, right? And searching for the barley. Well, again, in this book, it talks about how the Karaites, who are far from the eyewitness testimony about the Aviv, right? So what they would do is they would interrogate people who travel there. They would examine people who travel there and ask them, where's the Aviv there? Was the barley ripe, right? And if they were ripe, they knew that they should set their new year and not add a leap year, right? And then here's this other guy. It says, the scholars of the majority of Israel, of the Jewish people, are in consensus that it is good to follow a calculation for the intercalation of the calendar, meaning a calculation for the Aviv, for it is close to the Aviv when the barley is ripe in the land of Israel. However, the Karaite Jews who follow scriptures, who live in the land of Israel and in Egypt and in Alexandria, they send out emissaries, right? And then they seek to learn, search and seek to investigate each of the places where they know from tradition that the Aviv is. And they come back and they send emissaries back, and the emissaries come back to these communities by the 10th of Nisan so that they know whether or not to set a new year, right? Again, the Karaites in Cairo send messengers to Jerusalem every year to see when spring has begun, meaning the Aviv. According to the information they receive, again, it could be well that the Karaites in Cairo will add a month and the Karaites in Constantinople will not. Nevertheless, they do not see anything wrong with this. Everyone does what is right in his own eyes. Now, this is probably a polemic from the book of Judges when like they had no ruler and everyone was doing what was right in the new eyes. So it's not meant to sound complimentary. I take it as a compliment. It's not meant to sound complimentary, is my understanding. Let's skip this. Let's skip this. Okay, that's it. So that's all I want to share with you today. Happy to take, I see a whole bunch of questions. Oh yeah, Bar Teroma, 1445, good, thank you. Are there differences between Karaite beliefs, practices, and those of the original Yemenite Jews and the Ethiopian Jews? So let's start with the Ethiopian Jews. What I think is interesting about them is that the Karaites of the Crimea, if I recall correctly, sent a letter trying to figure out the practices of the Ethiopian Jews. And I don't know if they ever got a response. So of course, they themselves understand that, like, historically speaking, Ethiopian Jews were another non-rabbinic form of Judaism. I noticed I did not say they were a Karaite form of Judaism. I said they were a non-rabbinic form of Judaism. And I think that distinction is important. There were many non-rabbinic Jews historically. In the Middle Ages, there were the Karaites, and then the Issaites and the Mishawites and the Yogdanites and all these. And we have the Ethiopian Jews, right? So I do know one similarity, and that's about it. During Passover, the majority Karaite belief today is that you cannot have any fermented foods on Passover. Okay, no yogurt, no cheese, no nothing. And the reason for that is the Torah tells you not to have chametz on Passover, right? Well, chametz has the same root as the word, and the debate is, what is chametz, right? And so the Torah, you see the word chometz yayin, fermented wine. And what is fermented wine? It's vinegar. So, so the word chametz doesn't just mean these grains that have leavened. It's really more like fermentation. So Karaites also don't eat anything that is fermented on Passover. And I read an article that the Ethiopian community didn't eat yogurt and other types of fermented food on Passover. So that's the one thing I know about. I don't know if there's any relationship between, or they arrived at these interpretations on their own. So yeah, what other questions do we have? Yeah, okay, another one. What is the interpretation of work and what is not allowed on Shabbat? Oh my gosh. I mean, the books have been written on this. If only there were a book to explain this, and there's a Talmud that tells you what the definition of work is. Look, so in the rabbinic tradition, there are 39 melachot, 39 things that classify as melacha that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, okay? In the Karaite view, the word melacha is a normal word. It is a word that existed in the language. It was not a highly technical word. So, we don't believe that the word ever had this very highly technical meaning where you have to, like, well, this is okay and this is not okay, but this is okay, and right, you have to draw squiggly lines to figure what's okay. The general Karaite view of melacha, is task. Okay. So, like, what is it? And by the way, does anyone know how to say angel in Hebrew? Like a messenger is a malach, right? Well, what is a malach? A malach is carrying out the task of the person who sent it, right? So that's what, like, the mission of the person who sent it. So that is, generally speaking, the Karaite view. It's a task. Now, okay, well, what is a task, right? If getting out of bed in the morning, is that a task? Probably not. Getting dressed in the morning, is that a task? Probably not. walking down the streets to go to synagogue, okay, well, there's a productive purpose there to get to the synagogue. That's probably a task, maybe, I don't know. Like, but my point is, like, even though I've said it doesn't have this highly technical definition, right? Now it opens up a whole other set of problems, like what is a task, right? So generally on Shabbat, historically some Karaites permitted carrying on Shabbat, some Karaites do not. One guy named Hanan ben David, who some people call the founder of Karaism, which I'll say that, put that to the side and just say I don't accept that. He said you can carry anything that you don't have, that's not so heavy that you have to throw it over your back. So if it's like you have to put it over your back, you can't carry it, but you can carry your keys in your pocket, right? You don't need Shabbos keys that you carry around your neck, or you wear around your neck, or you wear as part of your clothing and all that stuff, right? He says, like, if you can carry it without putting it over your shoulder, it's fine, right? So, but yeah, so. And in that book, Royal Attire, it talks about various different interpretations of melacha. What other questions?
Shawn, can I ask? So how then practically, like within your synagogue, if, is there a procedure by which you make agreements, in terms of like when the new moon is going to be sighted, if someone has a differing opinion of yours, or, what is communally accepted in terms of Shabbat observance, or whatever the case might be?
Yeah, Shabbat observance is an easy one to answer. Unfortunately, most of the community is not observant on Shabbat. They'll drive to the synagogue just because they're old and it's a dispersed community, right? So let's put that aside. But like things like norms in the Karaite communities, that you don't have fires burning on Shabbat. Whereas the rabbinic tradition, you have candles and you have a blessing that says God commanded you to do that, right? The Karaites say, no, you're not allowed to do that at all, right? So that's like one norm. But like things like new moon, in Israel, like the community in Ashdod used to have this different calendar from the community in Beersheba, and they kind of got together and they resolved their differences. And like now they have the same calendar because they're all using the same method. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. I'll put that aside. But yeah, you can have, even in Israel, the people observing one day difference from their neighbor, and fathers having different days from their sons. And I use fathers and sons, but it could be mothers and daughters as well. So yeah. All right. If you are a conservative reformer, do not accept the whole. Okay. If you are a conservative reform and you do not accept that maybe the whole Torah, the oral Torah, was handed down over the ages, how are you different from Karaites? Well, look. Even today, if you're a Reformed Jew, right? Even today, if you're a Reformed Jew, generally speaking, you're still operating in the rabbinic paradigm, right? Like you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, which we don't do, right? You might wear tefillin, which we don't do. Even though you're maybe not doing it for theological purposes or whatever, like your whole paradigm is influenced by this rabbinic background, right? The rabbinic landscape. So yeah, you're different in that respect, but also theologically, right? Like if you are, I would posit that a secular Jew, right, a secular Jew is neither a Karaites nor Rabbinites, even though they may be influenced by the Karaites or rabbinic background that they come from, right? Because if you're secular, I would posit, putting aside issues of like Jews and on, right? If you're secular, you obviously don't have a theology. Like that's the point of being secular. Now the question is, okay, well, what about reform? Okay, well, if you're Reformed, what is your theology? Then I could tell you whether you are, quote, a Karaite or Rabbinite or something else, or whether you're influenced by the Karaite or the Rabbinite tradition, even though if you're doing something different. Same thing with Reform and Orthodox, right, and Karaites, right? So, but surely, here's the question, but surely you have a generation of interpreters over the centuries. Yes, we do, absolutely. We have plenty of interpretations. Every word of the Tanakh is subject to interpretation. By the way, let me see if I can pull it up really quickly and I'll share with you. Give me 1 second. Let me find it. Okay, so let me share this with you. Share. This is like total work in progress. So you guys are seeing things even before like the Karaite community, right? This book here, Yeri Oates Shlomo. Let me just close out some of these things that are work related. This book here is a late codification explanation of Karaite law. And if you go to it, it's in Hebrew, right? You can go to it and you can read about Karaite law here. Like I haven't even published this to like, it's not even public yet, right? This book here, Karaite Lecture, again, you can see it's got some glitches, is the last major codification of Karaite law. And look, I mean, this is half of the book, right? Look at, right? Like, look how long it is, right? Half of the book. So my whole point is that there are absolutely Karaite interpretations, and some of them become standard in the Karaite community. But like, again, I'm not bound by them. What else?
Could I ask, in terms of two things of regarding conversion practices and also women's roles?
Yeah, so conversion, up until 2007, the modern Karaite world had no conversions. In fact, the last conversion we knew of prior to that was 500 years earlier, when, according to testimony, a group of Christians became Jewish through the Karaite movement in Egypt, okay? So 500 years with no conversions. Now, what's interesting about the group of Christians becoming Karaites in Egypt, I have no reason to doubt the account, right? Like I don't have any like real reason to doubt it, but we know, generally speaking, the rule in the Islamic Empire was that if you were changing religions, you were changing your religion to Islam and not religion to any other religion. So again, I have no reason to doubt the accounts, but it is at odds with what we generally understood from what I generally understood from how the Islamic world is run. So yeah, conversions, we've had many converts throughout the last 14, 15 years, really. But yeah, so the process is very similar to what you would go through. You spend a year studying, you take some courses, you certify your adherence, you have a ceremony. We have no mikvah. We have no mikvah. So like, there's no mikvah, not even for conversion or anything like that. And then, what else did I want to say? You said women's roles. So generally speaking, more favorable to women involvements than the Orthodox community, but not as favorable as, let's say, the Reform community. About in the 11th century or 12th century, there was a woman named Al-Mu'allama. Al-Mu'allama means the teacher. And she was the teacher of the community in Spain, the Karaite community in Spain. And they would ask Al-Mu'allama how to do things. Whatever she said, they would do, right? It's a more complicated story than that. But the only thing I actually want to tell you about this is that her title was the teacher, which was the exact same title as the Karaites men had. So this is 900 years ago, long before modernism, long before peace and love of the 60s and 70s. The other example I'll give you is in the rabbinic tradition, and this is in the rabbinic tradition, a woman cannot get a divorce unless her husband willingly signs the get, right? Now, we can talk about what willingly signs the get means. Let's put that aside. But that's the traditional rabbinic halacha, is he has to willingly sign the get. In the Karaite community, a woman can get a divorce by the consent of a Beit Din. So the Beit Din can actually say, you guys clearly aren't married anymore. This is just like any other contract. You have a ketubah that says, you know, you're going to live together. Well, okay, let's just annul the contract. You're not married anymore. And so definitely more favorable in that respect. What is my Hebrew name? Yisrael. I took a Hebrew name later in life. I didn't have a Hebrew name as a child. What is the fate of the Karaite Jews in Nazi-occupied areas? That's an amazing question. So generally speaking, since the 18th century, Karaites, there's a whole book about this. It's called Karaite Separatism in 19th century Russia. So basically, generally speaking, the Karaites of we'll call it the Crimea, Russia, and even Poland, Lithuania, all that stuff, started adopting this belief that they were not of Jewish extraction. And by the time the Holocaust came, it was very clear that the Karaites had this separate identity. And there's even an edict, I think, there's definitely an edict that spared the Karaites from the Nazis. Some Karaites did die because the news hadn't got there in time and they were slaughtered. But generally speaking, they were exempt from the Holocaust. there are, I think if I recall correctly from my Jewish history classes, that there are 8 groups of Jews who were not considered Jews by the Nazis, and they were all exempt from the Holocaust. So. Have I read The Year of Living Biblically, and what are my thoughts? I've not read it, but he did, the guy who wrote the book, The Year of Living Biblically, H.A. Jacobs, I think his name is, he did contact me before writing the book to see if I would be one of his advisors on it. And I said no, only because I didn't have the time or the knowledge at the time to do it for him. Other questions?
We had a question in the chat. How do you judge if a person has become an adult with religious responsibility?
Yeah, great question. But I don't know if there is actually an age of majority that is accepted in the Karaite community. I don't know that. I don't know an answer there. I wish I did. Today in the US, we have bar mitzvahs, but we never had that in Egypt, right? This is just a classic, you're a minority of a minority and you don't want to stick out too much. Right? So like we have bar mitzvahs but like, I don't know if like you could imagine like fasting for Yom Kippur, somebody who's 9 might be able to do that. I did it when I was 8, right? And so like having that person wait till they're 12 or 13 doesn't make sense. But like, so yeah. So what other questions?
How far back can you trace the Karaite community?
Yeah, great question. So how far back can you, so the question is like, now we're in a world of definitions, right? The common myth, and I use that term myth or story or whatever, is that this guy named Anan ben David, Anan ben David, he wanted to become the head of the Jews in the diaspora, the head of the Jews under the Muslim Caliphate, basically. And I'm going to brush over all these details, and that he didn't get it, but his younger brother became the head. So he revolted, and he started this new movement called the Karaites. Well, we know that he didn't start a movement called the Karaites. We know that his followers were called the Ananites. And there was a 10th century Karaite named Jacob Kirkasani who said the difference between the Karaites and the the difference between the Karaites and the Ananites, and between the Karaites and the Ananites, were no less than were not as great as the differences between the Rabbinites from the land of Israel and the Rabbinites from, I believe, Babylon, right? So there were different groups at the time that were competing over like what to do. So like if you ask me, the first Karaite was in the 9th century, like Karaite as we understand it today, right? As we understand it today. But all these Jewish movements, I mentioned the Karaites, the Israelites, the Mishrawites, the Rabbinites, the Yugdanites, whatever, all these Jewish movements, they coalesced into like basically either disappeared or became part of the United Karaite movement or the United Rabbinic movement at the time. Or they disappeared, right? So, and again, of course, you have the Ethiopian Jews who were like separate and all that stuff. So yeah, how far can you trace it? Who knows? Like if I'm being like theologically polemical, like what I would say is I would trace it back to Moses, right? Because Moses didn't receive an oral law, and that is the fundamental difference between Karaites and Rabbinites, right? So, but like again, I'm not, instead of Moshe Rabbeinu, let's call him Moshe Karaenu, Moses our Karaite, not Moses our rabbi, right? So yeah, so like my point is like I could be polemical about it, but that's not. But I assume that wasn't your question. Happy to get polemical anytime you want that. Okay, next question. Torah is harsh on life on violating laws like adultery, homosexuality. Is there a modern Karaite interpretation? Ooh. Okay, so adultery. So look. Putting aside what our definitions of adultery are and homosexuality, let's put that aside because the question that came to me directly was about punishment. No Karaite believes today you can exact any type of formal bodily punishment on anybody. It's not allowed because we don't have a temple, we don't have a high priest, we don't have judges like religious judges, so we can't do anything like that. And that's for Sabbath violators too, right? So Sabbath violators are also like subject to death. Putting against, I know adultery and homosexuality, these are easy things to talk about, but Sabbath violators too, right? And so no Karaite today believes that you could have any type of bodily punishments, corporal punishment at all, because we don't have proper priests, sanctioned priests and judges. Next question: is there marriage between rabbinic Jews and is Karaites marrying rabbinites considered intermarriage? No, Karaites and a rabbinite marrying each other are not intermarriage. Generally speaking, like everybody, generally speaking, accepts that Karaites are Jews and that Rabbinites are Jews, and that this is, a marriage between two Jewish people who come from different backgrounds. In fact, in the Geniza, there is evidence of ketubot, of marriages between Rabbinites and Karaites. And because, generally speaking, the woman took the theology of the man, right? That's just kind of how the world worked. The examples we see that are the most interesting to me are where the Karaite woman is marrying a Rabbinite man, and it says things to protect her, like he shall not force her to sit by the flame of the Sabbath candle on Friday evenings, because again, Karaites didn't believe in that. And he will not bring in the fat of the sheep's tail into the house, because the Karaites don't eat that, the Rabbinites do. It's a big thing. We'll talk about it later if you care about it. And there's another one that I think one of them even said, like, they will not desecrate each other's holidays, meaning he could have her holidays, she could have her holidays, he could have his holidays. They will not desecrate them, right? So all these things are meant to protect, generally speaking, the woman, but the couple. There's a great book on this, like Karaite marriage contracts from the Geniza by, Professor Judith Osh. It starts with Judith O. You can check it out on. I'll drop it into the chat here.
The Rabbinical Assembly, I want to say like in the 90s, I think just as a matter of like, just to make this clear, made the, not that it was like a burning question, I think, but just to sort of codify what was already thought was that, that Karaite Jews are Jews. And so marriage between the two of them, apart from the obvious sort of cultural stuff that he was just talking about, like when you're going to have Rosh Hashanah and are you going to call it that or not, is allowed. So, and Karaite Jews are Jews. So.
And in fact, before my synagogue had a synagogue, right? Before we bought a synagogue, we needed a place to pray. And we prayed at a conservative synagogue in the 1980s. We prayed once a month in the big room where we got everyone to community come, and once every other week we're in the small room where like we had a smaller attendance. And then on the big ones, we would have more of our own people come on those days. So yeah. What else?
Any other questions, anybody?
You have shaved the four corners, yeah. So the four corners, look, I actually don't believe that that's the right interpretation anyway. So I'll shave my entire head. Like I probably won't have a bowl cut. Like I think that's me personally. I think that's forbidden. But for the most part, I'll shave my entire head. I don't have a problem. I remember, by the way, I lived at Pico and Robertson in LA for a summer, which is a very religious community. And I was getting my head shaved, and I heard the stylist, the shave guy, tell another guy in Russian, check to make sure he doesn't have payas. And he says in Russian, use the word payas, that's how I know, before you shave his head. So the guy looked, and I'm like, okay. So, but yeah, I don't. So, what else?
Tell us a little bit about, okay. I'm sorry. Can you tell us a little bit about the Karaite press? Because I noticed in a lot of the books that everything seems to have been published within the last, 5 or 10 years or so. So what was the state of affairs prior to that?
Yeah, let me go to the karaitepress.com. Share screen. Okay, so the community in Israel always published books, right? But like they're all in Hebrew, right? And let's just be honest, like we live in the diaspora and it's hard living in Galut in the diaspora. So I want to make things easier for people. So I went out and raised money to get books translated into English. So this book here is actually Hacham Tovi Babish, the same guy who I told you found that Torah scroll. And he tells us about that exact same episode in this book. He's like, I found books strewn hither and thither and all that stuff. And so he tells about this book. And so it's about his musings when he came to Egypt to help the community. And he wanted to educate the community about their historical figures. So you could see that he spent a long time on Anan Hanasi, Benjamin Nahawandi, and Rabbi Daniel Al-Kumisi. I started the Karaite Press about 8 years ago. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to end the share screen. About 8 years ago to get more books available in English. Let me just go back to the home here. This is a blessings book. If anyone wants blessings and some songs, I'm putting out a whole bencher soon. This book is the book I was telling you about that has all the major differences of Karaites and Rabbinites. This book here is really interesting. It was written in Judeo-Arabic. So if you don't read Arabic, you can, this book was written, see this top script here? I don't read Arabic at all, right? It's very minimally, but I'll tell you, just by reading the Judeo-Arabic, it says al-Aqid, right? The principles, al-Dinaya, Lil-Yahud, al-Karim. Al-Dinaya is the faith, like Deen, like in Hebrew, Deen, right? The Lil-Yahud, al-Karim, of the Karaite Jews. That's the first part of this book. The principles of faith of the Karaite Jews. Sharut al-Dabach, Sharut al-Zabicha, maybe, is the laws of slaughter. It was written in Judeo-Arabic. Arabic is meaning Arabic words in Hebrew characters. And you could see here, we have this book with the Arabic and the translation. So that's that. Anyway, I started this myself, and I've got a whole bunch of more books coming out. But if anybody wants to support me, and I don't make any money off of this, literally not a penny, I lose money off of this. But if anyone wants to support me and my work so that I can get more scholars to translate books, that would be amazing. Just go ahead and buy a book, buy the package for $27, whatever. And you'll get the books, and I can show my funders that people read the stuff. So thank you. Is Karaite Jewish community growing? Depends on how you define growing. In Israel, yes, the community is growing, but it's becoming less close to the community, right? The number of people are growing, but their closeness to historical Karaite norms is fading. And so you have to, like, so yes and no. We also have the same problems that every other community has, right? So like objectively speaking, I know no one likes to talk about this, but objectively speaking, like most non-Orthodox groups are having demographic issues. They're all an aging population. The kids generally aren't as involved, right? Like this is just, let's just be honest about this, right? Karaites in the United States have that exact same problem, and the Karaite problem in Israel will mirror the problems of non-Orthodox communities in Israel, So what do you do in real life? But are there actually common? So I'm a lawyer in real life. I'm a lawyer. But actually, are there common vocations? No. I mean, look, my community came, with like their engineering education from Egypt, and so most of them did some sort of engineering work. And then the kids do the same thing kids of immigrants and Americans do. So what else? Any other questions? I have I'm here, I'm happy to answer any questions you want. Like some of these questions were rather tame. So if you have some serious, I learned that the Karaites blah, blah, I want any myths you heard, any polemics you heard, let's do it. Let's have some fun here. It's all included in the same price.
Mention anything about wearing the yarmulke? So do Karaites wear a kippah?
I can't hear that question. So would you repeat it?
So since the idea of a yarmulke is in the written Torah, is it something that Karaites do?
Oh yeah, so that is a classic example where rabbinic theology or rabbinic practice, right, has influenced Karaites in a modern way, right? So so yes, the answer is yes. Most Karaites do. I'm indifferent to it. I'll wear a baseball cap to the synagogue just to have my hair covered out of respect, right? But I'm indifferent to it, to be honest with you. But even something like Simchat Torah, right? Simchat Torah is a relatively modern name for this holiday that we call that, even that you see changes in rabbinic tradition over time. I think it's 1,000 years old as far as a name for the holiday, right? So things change over time, even in the rabbinic tradition. Are there differences of belief in the Messiah? To be totally clear, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about the Messiah, so I'm not qualified to answer that question. I'm willing to be a good person even without the promise of Mashiach, right? So that's how you know that exactly. So But yeah, I don't spend much time thinking about it, so I'm not qualified to answer. At some point I'll be working on a book that discusses this, and then you can have me back and I can say, by the way, now I know the answer. I know what some Karaites say.
Can you talk about Karaite talus?
Yeah.
Talit?
So the Karaite Talit has blue fringes on the corner because the Torah tells you should have blue fringes, right? And our blessing is slightly different from your blessing. But yeah, we have blue fringes. And at the time in the Torah service, when you, in the, not service, time of the service, when you say, and you shall look upon them, we literally gather them and like hold them up like this, and we look upon them and we say those words. In fact, whether there's a whole debate, I think in the rabbinic tradition, if you're blind, you don't have to wear blue fringes because the commandment was you have to look upon it. And if you're blind, you can't look upon it. In the Karaite tradition, if you're blind, you still have to wear it because it's a reminder to the people around you. I mean, again, this is just an interpretation. That's the majority view. So I don't agree with that majority view, by the way. But that is the majority view.
Can you wear it at night for services?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. If your synagogue is lit, you should wear it and you should look upon it. Yeah, absolutely.
We don't generally.
But you don't wear it at night. So exactly. You're not required to wear it at night. So.
And there's only 2 prayer services during the day. Is that right?
Yeah. So evening and morning, exactly. So we have prayer services at the exact same times that the temple would have sacrifices. In fact, there's a very famous, I use that term loosely, song by, I think, Yehuda Halevi, a rabbinic poet and theologian and all this stuff. And he talks about in his song having 3 services. And the Karaites have the same song, they have that song in our Siddur, and they changed it from having 3 services to only having 2 services. Like they took out the reference to the 3rd service. And also, the very famous Rabbi Abraham ibn Ezra, I don't know how many people who know him, right? He's a very, very famous rabbinic theologian. He wrote a very famous song called Ki Yeshmera Shabbat. And Ki Yeshmera Shabbat, in it, it's a polemic against the Karaites. The whole thing is a polemic against the Karaites. Okay, understand that, okay? And he's like, those who do this are retrograde, and those that. So the Karaites, we have that same song in our book, but we changed the polemic to be a polemic against the Rabbinites. And so yeah.
We have that in the Siddur, everybody, as an alternative on Friday nights to Yigdal. So maybe this Friday we'll do that, just to and think of Shawn as we are
Shawn, exactly.
disparaging. Yeah.
And look, when you get to the point that says those who mourn on Shabbat are retrograde, understand that is a polemic against the Karaites. There's also like other references that are clearly polemics against the Karaites, and they're like, And by the way, Karaites, that line, the Karaites change it to those who have sex on Shabbat are retrograde. Because the rabbis, yeah, exactly. Take that, all of you, take that. But I wrote a whole blog article on this. Let me give you a sec. Hold on, let me see something. That time Ibn Ezra trolled. There's a whole article on this that I wrote called "That Time How Ibn Ezra Trolled the Karaites." Right. Let me put this for you in the Slack here that you can, in the Zoom that you can all read some other time. There's another question here. Has Travis Wheeler brought more African Americans in? So yeah, so there actually are quite a few people who've converted to Karaite Judaism who are Black Americans, not necessarily because of Travis, who's a shochet in our community, but yeah, there are quite a few people who have converted that are Black Americans. We also have a Black American family who converted through Chabad they now come to us and at the Karaite synagogue when they're in town. So yeah. What other questions? Any other questions? Great. Well,
We had a question here about connection between the Karaites and Sadducees.
Yeah, so if you ask me, so like we don't know, like just objectively speaking, we don't know how long these groups, the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Sadducees, lived after the destruction of the temple, right? I told you, like, as a theological matter, it was very hard for the Pharisees to exist, right? Because they believed you have to meet in a state of ritual purity, and if you can't have a temple, how can you ritual purity? Like, so they theologically would have to change their views. So, but the point is, like, we don't know how long the Pharisees in any form existed as a movement and the Sadducees in any form, right? So if you ask me, it is possible that Karaites are intellectual heirs of the Sadducees, right? But not direct descendants, it's hard for me to say there was a direct line between the Sadducees and the Karaites. But like, I would say they're intellectual heirs in my fluffy way of discussing it, but I think that's like not academically sound, so to speak. Any special foods are mostly based on Egyptian cuisine. I'm trying to think of any special foods that mostly based on Egyptian cuisine. So there's actually, okay, hold on here, because like, just because this is a good chance for me to like promote something here. There's like, here's the Karaite kitchen. I'm going to put that for you in the Slack too, in the Zoom. I keep saying Slack. Sorry for giving Slack free advertising when we're using Zoom in the Zoom chat. So there's the Karaite kitchen if people want to see some recipes. Any other questions? All right, well, this was really fun for me. I'm happy to come back anytime you want. Happy to be a part of this. Happy to answer questions again, another time. If anyone wants to reach out to me, the rabbi has my contact information. Don't be shy. If anybody wants to buy a book, I don't make any money off of it. I use 100% of the money to hire other scholars to translate books or to write books. And you can imagine, if you were a scholar of Judaica, there are not many great ways to earn money, especially in this environment. So, I'm really proud of the number of scholars that I've worked with and the amount of money that I've been able to give to like PhDs, like that level of people. So if anybody's interested in buying a book from the karaitepress.com or making a donation, that would be appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And just, certainly from an intellectual perspective, because I don't want to hear from all you guys, tomorrow that you're not wearing tefillin anymore, or that, whatever else, that you don't need to listen to me, because you do. But, the books, so, not only is it a fantastic deal in terms of how many books that you can get all at once, but they really are high level, high quality, well, researched, academic, academically sort of strong footnotes, comments, nicely laid out. So, I'm jealous because the Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue really does not put out anything, on that kind of level, for, the average layperson to read, which is really unfortunate, but some nice stuff. So I want to say thank you so much, Shawn. I really appreciate you making time for us. This has been absolutely fascinating, and yeah, as new things come out, we can definitely have you come back and talk to us. And if you do find yourself in Long Island, please come schlep over to where we are. But thank you everyone for joining us, and again, thank you very much, Shawn.
Bye-bye, my pleasure. Take care, everyone.
Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you very